the 10% is on the capital. So there could be an anomaly where the number of persons voting in favor of the scheme can be very less, maybe equal to 5 or 10% of the actual paid up capital present at the meeting. But the objector to come there and raise the 10% is only on the capital. When you come, we'll see. So we will have to read this term, present and voting, or present separately or voting separately, throughout the provisions. So luckily for here, for the first sanction or the approval, the word present and voting, which is found in the present 391(2), it continues the same way. They have not tinkered it. I think that again seems to be only a cut and paste, so they didn't make the mistake. Sometimes cutting and pasting doesn't make mistakes also. Luckily here they didn't make a mistake. But while drafting new sections, they made mistakes, because 233, 232 and 236 are all new sections. They have completely left out this concept. That's what I was telling you. 10% holding of the 10% of the shareholding. They should have said 10% of the persons present and voting. It would have saved the problem. And for creditors, 5% of the total outstanding debt. So if there are only 2 creditors, then a person who can come and oppose only 5% of total outstanding debt. Look at the value. I mean, this gives a practical problem, I would say, of having to bring persons of so much capital or debt to come and object. The flip side of this is also, presently in this meeting, if I am supposed to be an objector, then it helps. I can come and enlighten or maybe dissuade you from a scheme. But the point is, unless I hold 10%, I cannot come and stand here. It again means, if you see, who are the 10% who can object? That is a very nice, interesting aspect. I spent more than 1 hour reading that part. Person, group of person, or whatever, all joining together. Now, if I come and join with 10% here, are we deemed as 10%? The section is vague. Are we to group ourselves as 10% outside and get into the meeting? That is not clear. Or in the voting, 10% has voted again, therefore it's objection? No. So how to kind of work out this 10% is not very clear at all. They have not just said vaguely 10% of the shareholding you must hold to come and object. Now, as we say, if we group as 10% and we come and stand here, all these problems come. Now, otherwise, who comes and stands and objects? No one. So the company can actually stop you. Do you hold 10%? No. Are you going to support or object to the scheme? Object. Okay, you hold less than 10%, go out. You can't speak. So you will find persons only in favor of the scheme who will come and be speaking. Unless you hold 10%, presently at least anybody can go and speak on any resolution in a meeting. That's the corporate democracy which we have. But here, to oppose to the scheme. Now, oppose to the scheme again is in voting or objecting at the meeting. So objecting at the meeting is coming and voicing the objections. If you're going to object to the meeting, object to the scheme, he will say that you please sit down. You can't speak unless you hold 10%. So this is an indirect way of, whether it's consciously done or I would say subconsciously done, I do not know. Surely it has to be unconscious only. But the point is, this is a very vague provision where they've said, okay, fine, the benefit of the corporate, there must be some, I would say, stakes before you try to object. Was the intention, I think, but they completely messed it up, I would use the word. No buyback, academic, they wanted to get over the Sterlite judgment. Therefore, they said that for reduction of capital, they said no problem, you can do it as part of the scheme. But for a buyback, the rationale, we do not know, but they wanted to do away with what the Sterlite scheme or the Bombay High Court division bench, that you can do a buyback also as part of the scheme. There could be one reason is because of section 236, because a buyback was effectively to squeeze out the minority shareholding as what we see, because it's a separate section. But again, that separate section, they messed it up. When I come to that, you will see. And I use the word messing up a little bit more for a simple reason, with a little bit of responsibility, because I also hold a government position where we draft the sales tax laws and other laws for the state. I do have to give credit to those officers because they have 10 to 20 scenarios in their mind when they draft, but they forget the remaining which could also have its effect. So they do their best, we should say, but that doesn't mean that they have done their best. Before they do anything, they should have taken much more wider, I would say, comments before doing so. For the Act 2, after taking, they've still made this, we can't say, the rules are still bad. So the reduction has to be read along with 68 with 236, if at all. The analogy could be that is what is my view, but there's no analogy between a reduction in 66 and a buyback in 68. Then the takeovers, they are now saying that you can do a merger through a takeover or a demerger through a takeover. Takeovers as such, we have to, this is very vaguely worded again between listed companies and unlisted companies. This also brings about, I've been speaking everywhere, where a listed company merges into unlisted, and you will not be relisted until you do this, is what they say. And if you want to remain unlisted, you must give a offer to the dissentients. Now, this is bypassing the delisting guidelines. I would say this is the section I would call which is completely against public shareholders in the whole act. This one section which should not be there. The only place where public shareholders are coming in the 25% public category who have a benefit to control their price is in the delisting mechanism, where the reverse book building process is followed, where a floor price is brought about, and you quote above the floor price, whatever be the price. You can even quote the sky. There have been cases which we have done where the floor price was 40, but the discovered price was 140. So who got the benefit? The public shareholders. Either the promoter or his wholly owned, I would say the holding company abroad, had to pay that if they want to go for delisting. Now here, they can actually form another company, merge it, and say that I will go through a valuation process as per the company's the rules presently and pay them out. Now this is not what it means. The process is to have a price discovery before it goes into delisting. That goes. The saving grace, if at all, could be the tribunal could say, because the section uses the word wherever SEBI guidelines are there, the tribunal can ask you to follow the SEBI guidelines. It's a separately worded section, not connected to this. If the tribunal is vigilant enough, it could say that I would not sanction such a scheme unless you go through the delisting guidelines. But can the tribunal say so becomes another issue, because section uses the word, look, I am to only pay a valuation to the shareholders, I am ready to pay. Can you read beyond that and say that follow that rules? This is going to be a litigation which we'll have to wait and see. Section as such reads, you have to give the exit to the public shareholder or the dissentient shareholders, what you call, in the listed company, not in the unlisted. Again, if I'm a shareholder in the listed and also in the unlisted, if I'm against this restructuring, the section uses the word you can give an exit only to the listed shareholding, not to my unlisted. So what was my shareholding in unlisted continues. For that, I'll have to go through a different process completely. I will come under the term dissentient. Here, by virtue of being in the listed company's shareholding, there as a dissentient. And you find two different words of valuation. One place it uses the word expert, in another places valuation in accordance with rules. I'm just telling you that I find so much to learn, and in word earn also. I find so much prospects in this provisions and completely create a chaos for the whole thing which has been settled for 60 years. We always have to move forward, but this seems to unsettle a lot of things. So this is one place I'm totally critical, where a listed to merge is unlisted, and if you want to continue unlisted, you do a valuation and give an exit. That is completely wrong with the present exit offer. Then this is at least academic, where it involves a conversion of an instrument from a debt into equity, and it results in a takeover. You will have to follow this particular provision of 7 and 12. It is just for the purpose of exit. In regard to the purpose, they have at least used a last line saying that if it results in takeover code attraction, you follow the takeover code. Now the exit offer doesn't have a takeover code. Exit offer has takeover plus delisting guidelines. Here the delisting guidelines have got itself stunted. Then the power of tribunal to enforce compromise arrangements. This is effectively the present 392. If after the sanction you find, please tell me my last 10 minutes, sir. I do not want to run much. I can at least go faster. As I told you, I am trying to touch more on the critical aspects of these provisions, because these are more presently in vogue in our practice, so I am touching upon these. This is regarding 392. I will not trouble you. Not much of difference. Then accounting treatment compliance, a very, very new concept. How many minutes do I have? 5? I'll then take the remaining, maybe the question answer session too. Yeah, sure. Okay, thanks. This is a new area. They want a certificate from company's auditor that you are in accordance with all the accounting standards. I should say that most of the private companies, why should they talk about accounting standards? Closely held companies. you say that all this, the transaction is fully compliant accounting standards. They want us now. How it's going to have an impact on all the mergers where we don't even talk about these. We'll have to wait and see. Treasury stock cross holdings which have been moved away to trusts, completely done away with. Each company used to have a shareholder welfare trust where they'll park all these cancellation which could attract and the capital to come down. So move those shares. They don't want that. 232. Now I spoke only about the parent section, 230 till now. But 232 is where the merger and amalgamation comes through. Now 232 uses the word merger or amalgamation. Presently the section uses the word amalgamation or reconstruction alone. So the concept of merger, suddenly you will find merging companies, amalgamating companies, and transfer or transfer. You have various, I mean, when the Englishman drafted it, he did it well. Then the rules of demerger, 15.31, this is the rule I was referring to. 15.31 talks about demerger, where the section doesn't even use the word demerger. Contents of notice. Now, apart from what we saw in 391, you will also have to put these in the notice, which is in regard to the directors, confirming the copy, then the key man, KMP, all these. I would not like to read it. And a supplementary accounting statement in case it is the last financial statement is not within 6 months. Then you have to give a supplementary accounting statement. The shares held by NRIs, they just want to bring about the FEMA compliance and make it online with this. Merger of a listed with unlisted, this is what exactly I was trying to see and tell you earlier, which was there also. You may go through this later. I have given already my comments. The appointed date finds itself in the code. The Marshall and Sons famous case, which explained what an appointed date is, it finds itself. It means when the scheme takes effect. Post-sanction formalities, you have to certify that everything has been complied with, either a chartered accountant or a company secretary. Well, on a separate session, I would like to read the definition of the word chartered accountant itself. In the whole act, they have completely said chartered accountant in practice in one place, chartered accountant in one place, and if you read the word chartered accountant in section 2, it says a person who is chartered accountant in practice. So can a person inside the company certify? No. Then there's a huge confusion, the term expert also. So another day, maybe surely I'll touch upon that. Indian with foreign company, there's again a slightly vague term which I would like to frustrate. The point is, it says that an Indian company or a foreign company can merge with a company registered under this act. The word uses under this act. So does it mean that it is with a company only formed under the Companies Act 2013? The saving grace for a negative interpretation is company means a company registered under this act or previous act, it says. But here, because the word specifically is with a company registered under this act, so looking at it prospectively, does it mean that the Indian company should have been formed under the 2013 company? We'll have to interpret it and only see. Fast track amalgamations, you would like to, there's only a term coined, actually speaking it's not fast track, you don't find it either in the act nor in the rules. It says that only for small companies. I've already said, small company says it doesn't include public companies. So you have two public companies which have only 10 shareholders, but they can't come under this. It has to necessarily be other than public companies. And the moment the paid up capital, you know what a small company size is. So wholly owned subsidiary, at least they've saved. The declaration of solvency becomes a major issue. Now the declaration of solvency leads to one more reading, whether a loss-making company is a solvent company and a loss-making balance sheet level and a P&L level. So how do you identify solvency for the purpose of merging? Presently, you only give a declaration of solvency that there are enough assets in case of liquidation for the voluntary winding up. But for a merger concept, what is solvency? We'll have to wait and see. Fast track merger, I've given the stepwise how it is done. Same comments, I will not trouble you for a moment. The dissentient shareholder provision of 235 is equivalent to 395. Not much of change. You have a separate exit route for the dissentient here, which is a cut and paste from 395. So you already have the third exit route here. 230 you saw one exit. 232 you saw one exit where the mergers bring about dissentient, the listed, unlisted. That's the third. This is the fourth, in fact. I'm losing count of the number of the exits here. 236, this is a new section. This is what the industry has been looking out for a long time. They tried to go through the SEBI route. SEBI plugged it. They didn't want to oblige the industry. They wanted to do away the delisting guidelines of the reverse book building route. They said no. That is the only place where the public shareholders